Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Mega Projects. This one is all about, well, SOSUS. I did look up how you say this. There wasn't a lot of information. My pronunciation dictionary let me down. So it might be SOSUS, but that is a massive mouthful, so I'm going with SOSUS. Let's set a precedent here. But before we get started, I will say that this video is brought to you by Surfshark. Safety and security online are super important, and you can protect yourself online with Surfshark. Get 83% off and 3 months for free. That's a pretty fantastic deal through the link in the description below, and let's jump in. Because as outrageous Cold War spying escapades go, this is a pretty good one. The Sound Surveillance System, SOSUS, was an American initiative that deployed an underwater listening system intended to track Soviet submarines. Initially set up in the Atlantic, it eventually spread and was later installed in the Pacific. By placing hydrophones, that's an underwater microphone if you couldn't guess, on the ocean floor, the Americans, and most likely the British, were able to track Soviet activity across the Atlantic Ocean. This was a practice that went on for decades and only fully came to light in 1991 after the fall of the USSR. Although by that point it had been an open secret for some time. This also led to some tantalizing stories of how Soviet submarines who had assumed they had evaded detection were being tracked closely by American submarines without them knowing. And if that doesn't sound like a great setup for a movie, we don't know what is. We are waiting, Hollywood! As you might imagine, even after declassification, there is still plenty of mystery surrounding this project that, as far as we know, is actually still ongoing. The detection of submarines has always traditionally been through the use of sonar, which works by sending pulses of sound waves through the water and then measuring how long they take to hit an object and then bounce back to the transmitter, where they're rather nicely displayed on a screen that we can read. Although I've looked at sonar screens, and unless you know how to read that, what is that? It's just this weird grey shadow. Several animals use a form of sonar: dolphins, bats, and apparently shrews, which is news to me. For the first human, though, we need to go back over 500 years to Jack of all trades, Leonardo da Vinci, who found that by placing a tube in water and then putting your ear to said tube, you could detect vessels in the water close by. Leonardo da Vinci was a total legend. The first time we see stationary hydrophones placed in water came during World War I with the work of J. Warren Houghton, whose rudimentary hydrophones were first tested off the coast of Nahant in Massachusetts, and who was in the process of laying more in the Irish Sea when peace was declared. So not a great deal happened on the sonar front from the end of World War I to the outbreak of World War II, so they didn't have to wait very long. Really short period in between those two massive international bloodsheds. But once the world found itself in the grip of global war once again, nations around the world kicked their sonar capabilities into overdrive. Amid the bedlam that was World War II, some quite extraordinary scientific discoveries were made. Some, like the atomic bomb, made killing even easier, while others, like radar, synthetic rubber, and even the full potential of penicillin, have had wide-ranging benefits ever since the conclusion of the conflict. So, World War II. Apparently totally worth it. Not really, relax. Another discovery, perhaps not quite as dramatic but important nonetheless, was the discovery of sound fixing and ranging channels, or SOFAR. These are naturally occurring channels underwater, approximately 1,000 meters, 3,300 feet down, where the speed of sound is at its minimum, meaning sound can travel vast distances before dissipating. To give you a very basic example, remember as children how you'd build those two cups on the piece of string? Well, this is a little bit similar, although it's underwater and the distances can be hundreds of miles apart, so I guess don't try that one at home. This was discovered separately by Morris Ewing and J. Lamar Wurzel at Columbia University and Leonid Breshovskih at Lebedev Physics Institute in Moscow in the 1940s, but large-scale testing didn't happen until 1944 when Ewing and Wurzel hung a hydrophone from a ship while a second vessel 1,700 kilometers away set off an explosive charge. The effect was even better than had been anticipated. The carnage that the German U-boats had inflicted during World War II showed the world just how devastatingly effective these monsters creeping through the depths could be. As the US and USSR began their marathon arms race, the numbers of submarines on both sides absolutely exploded. By the end of the 1950s, the United States was preparing to introduce its first submarine armed with submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The USS George Washington, with its 16 Polaris A-1 missiles, entered service in 1959, and it's probably fair to assume that the Americans knew the Soviets were not very far behind. And when I say not very far behind, I mean really they were at almost exactly the same time. The Soviet K-19 submarine was completed in 1960 and suffered a complete loss of coolant to its main reactor on its maiden voyage. Only the heroic efforts of the crew, who were able to construct a temporary coolant system, managed to avert a complete nuclear meltdown. However, the contamination on board K-19 had been extensive, and within 2 weeks, 8 crew members had died. Within 2 years, that number had reached 22. In true Soviet style, the cause of death was not recorded as radiation poisoning, but rather down to astheno-vegetative syndrome. Mental disorder, because of course it was. But the crew of the K-19 were under no illusions of what had happened and gave their cursed submarine a new nickname: Hiroshima. The oceans were becoming an even more dangerous place, and with the introduction of ballistic missiles that could be fired from anywhere on the planet, both sides were eager to gain any advantage that they could. And here's an advantage that you can gain right now: affordable access to an amazing VPN. Look, imagine yourself like a Russian submarine. Do you want the entire Western world to know all of your passwords, or everywhere that you go? Well, probably not. Definitely not. That's where Surfshark comes in. It has HackLock, which searches databases for your passwords, which sounds like a bad thing, but no. Surfshark are the good guys. They find it, and they'll let you know. You change your password, and boom, you're back in the warm comfort of safety. And while you're in that warm comfort of safety, maybe you're like, let me watch some Netflix. But what's this? You want to watch The Hobbit? What a brilliant movie! But what's that? That favorite movie? Your favorite movie? Maybe it's The Hobbit, maybe it's something else. Hopefully something else. It's only available in the UK, but you live in Alaska. Terrible. But Surfshark will fix that right up. Boom. Sneaky. Now you're in the UK through the magic of VPN technology. And then you're like, oh, The Hobbit was great. I want to go to New Zealand to see those little Hobbit houses. But what's this? You're getting prices that are really too high for flight? That's probably because you live in a rich country. Well, flip it over to some other country where things are less expensive, and boom, maybe you get some cheaper flights. You never know. Surfshark is totally unlimited, so if you want to download The Hobbit in raw 8K, just go for it. 30 days money back if you don't like it. Get 83% off and 3 months for free through the link in the description below, or just use the code MEGA. And now let's go find those Soviet rascals. The origins of SOSUS began in 1949 with a set of recommendations from a study group known as Project Hartwell, which had been tasked with researching anti-submarine warfare. They concluded that the US should spend $10 million, equivalent to about $107 million in 2019 annually, to build and maintain a vast array of hydrophones that could take advantage of the sound superhighways of these SOFAR channels. A series of projects then got underway, some of which actually remain rather mysterious even to this day. Project Jezebel explored the use of low-frequency analysis and recording, using a low-frequency analyzer and recorder, which confusingly uses the same acronym, LOFAR, to give a visual representation in real time of frequencies picked up from the buoys in the Atlantic Ocean. This was done using AT&T's sound spectrograph, which had originally been developed for speech analysis, but was now modified to analyze low-frequency underwater sounds. Basically, these can provide a permanent visual record of sound energy from a particular point. Nowadays, you can hold a LOFAR in your hands, but back in the 1950s, these lofagram writers were enormous contraptions. This was greatly expanded upon by the slightly wordy ANSQQ-28 passive omnidirectional Jezebel LOFAR sonar buoy, which began to be used in 1956 as a way of transmitting data from buoys directly to the aircraft above. By using Bell Telephone Laboratories time delay correlation, users were able to fix the position of a submarine or vessel using 2 or more buoys, a technique known as correlation detection and ranging, or CODAR. And oh boy, could there be more acronyms in this video. Between the 2nd and the 19th of January 1952, the British cable layer Alert worked to install the first experimental yet fully operational SOSUS elements off the island of Eleuthera in the Bahamas. This included a 304-meter, 1,000-foot-long array, the wiring system that connects it all, complete with 40 hydrophones laid on the ocean floor, 438 meters down. Initial tests with a target submarine proved successful, and a further 9 arrays were ordered and laid in the western North Atlantic. In 1954, 10 more arrays were added, but this time spreading out, with 3 in the Atlantic, 6 off the western coast of the US, and close to Hawaii. These arrays and their hydrophones needed to be connected to facilities onshore, where a LOFAR machine was located. This was done with a multi-pair wire, but with a maximum length of 241 kilometers, it meant that the entire system needed to remain relatively close to land. The arrays were often positioned on continental slopes or seamounts, at a section where deep sound channels typically converged. What was first placed in the late 1950s worked, but was quickly improved upon over the coming decades in what came to be known as the Caesar phases, and included the installation of multiplexed coaxial cable and major upgrades in the shore facilities, which included the digital spectrum analysis (DSA), which measures the power of the spectrum coming from a signal, speeding up the accuracy of detection. Further cable upgrades were placed in 1972, and in 1994, SOSUS prepared for the 21st century, when its original cables were replaced with fiber optics. The extent of which US authorities were able to successfully track Soviet submarines isn't always clear. Without knowing the exact number of vessels officially operating in an area, it's difficult to get an exact read on just how successful SOSUS was. But we do know the first time that it successfully picked up a Soviet submarine. On the 6th of July 1962, NAVFAC Barbados was able to track a Soviet submarine close to Norway as it moved through the Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, GIUK gap. It became known as contact number 27103. There are some stories of a US submarine then quietly following behind undetected, but unfortunately, that can't be verified. In 1968, SOSUS tracked its first Victor and Charlie class Soviet submarines, and in 1974, a Delta class submarine was also tracked for the first time. Perhaps one of the most extraordinary uses of SOSUS came in the build-up to Project Azorian. Now, we've done an entire video on this subject on mega projects before, so I don't want to say too much on this topic here. If you want to find more about Project Azorian, and you should, because this is wildly impressive and cool, you should go check out that particular video. But remember, I need that sweet watch time, so finish watching this one first, please. Project Azorian was the barely believable tale of how the US successfully located and then tried to raise a sunken Soviet submarine, the K-109. This was a nuclear-powered submarine that had disappeared in 1968, and despite extensive searching, Soviet authorities weren't able to locate it. But the Americans did, and, well, you can probably guess how they did it. By using the SOSUS system, they were able to pinpoint the location of the underwater explosion that had ultimately doomed the submarine. As I said, what came next is barely believable, but the Americans essentially built a ship that could pick up a submarine and hide it inside it. But let's not get sidetracked for more on Project Azorian. As I said, check out the video. Also, Howard Hughes is involved, so it's probably going to be a bit crazy. It is. SOSUS was also used to locate 2 US submarines that had sunk, the USS Thresher in 1963 and the USS Scorpion in 1968. You'd be amazed how many nuclear submarines have sunk over the years, which is currently 11. While the system worked in that it could detect submarines and large objects in the water, it came with numerous problems. When SOSUS began operation, those working on it just had no idea what a Soviet submarine sounded like. This was still a long way from the signature library of Soviet submarine acoustics that was later compiled. Those scanning with the LOFAR were doing so pretty much blind, and there were plenty of vessels in the water at that stage. Only after the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the US set up a blockade around the Caribbean island, did the traffic in the area reduce, and those listening through SOSUS began to hear unusual underwater signatures, which were soon deemed to be Soviet submarines. Then there was the question of secrecy, and the rather bizarre distrust between between the surveillance community and the Navy. The information gathered by SOSUS was rarely shared widely with the naval fleet in the vicinity, while the US Navy for some time believed that their submarines couldn't be heard by SOSUS. When the system successfully picked up the USS George Washington in 1961, the Navy began the process of quietening their submarines in response. Lastly, and perhaps most dangerously, the lack of communication between those involved sometimes led to mistaken identity, something which happened in 1962 and 1963 when US submarines deployed on classified missions close to the Soviet coast were picked up by SOSUS, which then relayed the incidents up the chain of command as they couldn't be sure what they had heard. Though nothing ever came of these incidents, it did expose the frailties of the SOSUS system when combined with a lack of communication. SOSUS was officially declassified in 1991, but by this point, it had been an open secret for some time. The immediate need for SOSUS disappeared almost overnight, and the number of people involved in it came tumbling down from a reported 4,000 during the 1980s to just 1,000 by 2010. The number of shore installations has also been drastically reduced, but a presence remains on the east and west coast of the United States, as well as one further station out in the Pacific Ocean. Compared with other technological developments that occurred after World War II, SOSUS might not sound particularly impressive, but the fusing of natural elements in our world with modern technology was groundbreaking. It's a service that certainly has its limitations, and how effective it is at picking up modern submarines, which are considerably quieter, is another matter. But until we develop satellites that can scan underwater, it's likely SOSUS, in some form at least, will continue to keep its ear to the ground, or rather the water. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, smash that like button below. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, please do check out our fantastic sponsor, Surfshark, who I'm linking to below. And thank you for watching.